What if the person dusting your shelves was hiding a secret that could unravel your entire world? Picture this, a single clue so shocking it makes you question everyone and everything you thought you knew. This is the story of James Harper, a grieving widower, Maria Delgado, a quiet maid, and a sapphire necklace that pulls back the curtain on a tangled web of secrets, love, and betrayal. Buckle up, because this tale is bursting with twists that'll keep you hooked, wondering how one piece of jewelry could rewrite so many lives. We're diving into a true story that feels like it leapt straight out of a Hollywood thriller, and by the end, you'll be asking yourself, what would you do if you stumbled across a secret this earth-shattering? Let's paint the picture. Imagine a grand mansion perched on the edge of a sleepy town called Willow Creek. It's the kind of place you'd see on a postcard. Tall, arched windows catching the golden afternoon light, emerald lawns that stretch out like a carpet, and a cobblestone driveway that whispers old money. This is James Harper's world. At 52, he's a real estate tycoon who built an empire buying and selling properties across the state. But this mansion? It's more than just a house. It's a shrine to his late wife, Elizabeth. James and Elizabeth were the kind of couple everyone envied. They met in their 20s at a charity gala, her in a flowing green dress, him in a slightly too tight suit, both laughing over a spilled glass of wine. They were inseparable, building a life filled with love, late-night talks, and dreams of growing old together. The mansion was their canvas, every room painted with memories. The kitchen where Elizabeth burned her first attempt at lasagna. The living room where they danced to old jazz records. The garden where they'd sit under the stars, planning their future. But 5 years ago, that future was stolen. Elizabeth got sick, suddenly, brutally. A rare illness that swept through her like wildfire, leaving doctors helpless and James shattered. She was gone within months, and the mansion that once echoed with her laughter fell silent. Her clothes still hang in the master closet, neatly pressed. Her favorite crystal vase sits on the mantel, catching dust. And her jewelry? It's locked in a biometric safe in James's study, untouched, like sacred relics. Especially her favorite piece, a sapphire necklace with a diamond-encrusted clasp, a gift from James on their 20th anniversary. He can still see her wearing it, the way the sapphire caught the light, mirroring her eyes. James couldn't bear to change a thing. But a house this big doesn't run itself. Enter Maria Delgado, 34, a soft-spoken woman with a warm smile and eyes that seem to carry a quiet weight. She was hired as the live-in maid about a year ago, recommended by a local agency. Maria's the kind of person who blends into the background. Efficient, polite, almost invisible. She dusts the shelves, polishes the oak floors, and keeps the mansion from crumbling under the weight of James's grief. To him, she's just a cog in the machine, someone to keep the lights on and the dishes clean. But sometimes, the people we overlook are the ones holding the keys to the biggest mysteries. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and drizzly, the kind of day that makes you want to stay buried under the covers. James was in his study, a wood-paneled room lined with books he hasn't read in years, poring over spreadsheets for a new development project. Maria slipped in to clean, her footsteps soft against the hardwood. She was wiping down the bookshelves, humming a tune James couldn't place, something soft, almost mournful. He barely noticed her, his eyes glued to numbers on the screen. Then it happened. Maria dropped her rag, bending down to pick it up. As she did, her collar shifted, and a flash of blue and silver caught the light. James froze. His coffee mug stopped halfway to his lips. Around Maria's neck was a necklace that looked exactly like Elizabeth's, the sapphire pendant, the diamond clasp, the delicate chain that used to rest against his wife's collarbone. His heart slammed against his ribs. It couldn't be. That necklace was locked in the safe, secured by his fingerprint alone. There was no way anyone could have taken it. He blinked, hard, thinking maybe his eyes were playing tricks. Grief does that sometimes, makes you see ghosts in the corners of rooms. But no, It was there, dangling from Maria's neck as she straightened up and moved to the next shelf. His throat tightened, his palms clammy against the desk. Was she a thief? Had she cracked the safe somehow? Or was there something else going on, something he couldn't even begin to wrap his head around? James didn't say a word. He couldn't. His mind was a hurricane of questions, each one louder than the last. Maria finished cleaning, gave him a polite nod, and slipped out of the room, oblivious to the storm she'd just ignited. But James was already spiraling. That necklace wasn't just jewelry, it was a piece of his soul, a tether to the woman he'd lost. And now, it was hanging around the neck of a stranger. For the next few days, James turned into a detective in his own home. He wasn't the confrontational type. Years of closing real estate deals had taught him to stay calm, calculated, but he wasn't about to let this slide. He started watching Maria, really watching her, noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. The way she moved through the house, like she knew every creaky floorboard by heart. The way she paused by Elizabeth's old photos in the hallway, her eyes lingering just a second too long, softening in a way that felt personal. It was subtle, but it was there. And the necklace? She wore it every day, tucked under her collar like a secret she didn't want anyone to see. But not tucked well enough. His first move was to check the safe. He waited until Maria was out running errands, then punched in his code and pressed his thumb to the scanner. The safe clicked open, and there it was, Elizabeth's necklace, nestled in its velvet box, the sapphire glinting under the study's dim light. James held it, the metal cool against his skin, familiar in a way that made his chest ache. If the necklace was here, then what was Maria wearing? A copy? A coincidence? The design was too specific, the diamond clasp shaped like a crescent moon, the sapphire cut in a way that caught the light just so. It wasn't something you'd find in a department store. Doubt crept in, gnawing at him. Was he imagining things? Grief can mess with your head. Studies show that 60% of people who lose a loved one experience visual or auditory hallucinations tied to their memories, according to a 2022 report from the Journal of Grief and Loss. But this felt too real. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. James wasn't about to accuse Maria without proof. He'd seen too many business deals go south over rash assumptions. So he called in a professional, Tom Brennan, a private investigator with a reputation for being discreet and thorough. Tom was a grizzled guy in his 40s, the kind who looked like he'd seen it all, divorce cases, corporate espionage, you name it. James gave him one job, dig up everything on Maria Delgado. Where she came from, who she was, and, most importantly, why she was wearing a necklace that looked like Elizabeth's. While he waited for Tom's report, James started testing Maria. He left small traps around the house, a $20 bill on the kitchen counter, a gold watch on the coffee table, a half-open drawer with cash peeking out. He watched her like a hawk, half expecting her to pocket something. But Maria never took the bait. She'd clean around the money, adjust the watch so it sat neatly, close the drawer without a glance. It was almost frustrating. If she wasn't a thief, then what was she? Why the necklace? What was she hiding? A week later, Tom showed up at the mansion with a manila folder and a grim expression. "This one's interesting," he said, sliding the folder across James's desk. The file on Maria Delgado was thin, too thin. Born in a small town called Riverton, about 2 hours from Willow Creek. No criminal record, not even a parking ticket. No immediate family listed. She'd worked as a housekeeper for a handful of wealthy families over the past decade, always with stellar references. Hardworking, trustworthy, a gem, her employers called her. Nothing raised a red flag, except for one photo. Tom had tracked down an image from a Christmas party at one of Maria's previous jobs, a ritzy estate in the city. In the photo, Maria was in the background, serving drinks, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. And there, clear as day, was the necklace, sapphire pendant, diamond clasp, identical to Elizabeth's. James's stomach dropped. "This was 3 years ago," Tom said. "She's been wearing it for a while." James's head was a mess. Was she a con artist, collecting look-alike jewelry to scam people? Was she obsessed with Elizabeth somehow? Or was there something deeper, something he couldn't see yet? He needed to know more, but he wasn't ready to tip his hand. Confronting her now might scare her off, and he'd lose his chance to get the truth. Instead, he invited Maria to sit down for a talk, something he'd never done in the year she'd worked for him. They sat in the living room, the same room where he and Elizabeth used to curl up with a glass of wine. Maria looked nervous, her hands twisting in her lap, her eyes darting to the floor. James kept his voice steady, almost gentle. "Maria, I couldn't help but notice the necklace you've been wearing. It looks familiar. Can you tell me about it?" Her face went white, like she'd seen a ghost. For a second, James thought she might run. But then she took a shaky breath and started talking. Maria's voice was soft, but there was a strength behind it, like someone who'd carried heavy burdens for a long time. She told James the necklace came from her mother, Elena, given to her when she was 16. Elena was a single mom, a seamstress who worked late nights to keep a roof over their heads. They didn't have much, hand-me-down clothes, a one-bedroom apartment, meals stretched thin, but the necklace was Elena's treasure. She said it was a family heirloom, Maria explained, her fingers brushing the pendant. "She told me to keep it safe, no matter what. Even when we were broke, she never sold it." James listened, his heart thumping so loud he was sure Maria could hear it. It was a good story, the kind that tugs at your heartstrings. But he wasn't convinced. That necklace was too specific, too perfect a match for Elizabeth's. He leaned forward, his voice still calm but firm. "Maria, that necklace looks exactly like one my wife owned. Not just similar, identical. How do you explain that?" Maria's eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked like a deer in headlights. Then she pulled out her phone, her hands trembling as she scrolled through photos. She stopped on one and turned the screen toward him. It was Elena, her mother, smiling in a faded sundress, the sapphire necklace gleaming against her collarbone. The photo was time-stamped 2005, years before Maria ever stepped foot in James's mansion. "This was my mom," Maria said quietly. "She wore it every day until she gave it to me." James stared at the photo, his mouth dry. Elena looked familiar. Not just in a vague way, but in a way that made his skin prickle. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her jaw, it was like looking at a shadow of Elizabeth. Was it possible? 2 identical necklaces? A coincidence? Or was there a connection he was missing? James couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something huge. He started digging into Elizabeth's past, something he hadn't done since she died. Elizabeth grew up in Riverton, the same town Maria was from. She'd come from a modest family, but she rarely talked about her childhood. When James asked, she'd smile and say, "The past is the past. I'm here with you now." He'd always thought it was because she wanted to focus on their life together, not dwell on old memories. But now, he wondered if there was more to it. He pulled out Elizabeth's old photo albums, dusty and untouched for years, and started flipping through them. Page after page of her life before him, her as a kid with pigtails, her at prom in a sparkly dress, her with friends at the county fair. And then he found it, a photo of Elizabeth at 17, standing arm in arm with a girl who looked almost like her twin. Same dark eyes, same high cheekbones, same shy smile. And around the other girl's neck? The necklace. Sapphire, diamond clasp, unmistakable. James's hands shook as he stared at the photo. Who was this girl? Why had Elizabeth never mentioned her? He called Tom immediately, his voice urgent. "I need you to dig into Elizabeth's family. Everything you can find. Start with her childhood in Riverton. Tom got to work, and what he found turned James's world upside down. 2 weeks later, Tom came back with a thick file and a look that said he'd uncovered something big. "You're not gonna believe this," he said, spreading documents across James's desk. Elizabeth had a sister. A sister she'd never told James about. Her name was Elena Delgado, yes, Elena, Maria's mother. The story unraveled like a thread pulled from a sweater. Elizabeth and Elena were born in Riverton to a working-class family. Their parents died in a car accident when the girls were 12, leaving them orphaned. The system split them up. Elizabeth was adopted by a wealthy couple who gave her a new last name and a cushy life, while Elena bounced between foster homes, never finding a permanent place to land. The sisters lost touch, their bond fractured by distance and circumstance. Elizabeth went on to college, met James, and built a life of privilege. Elena struggled, raising Maria alone, working long hours as a seamstress to make ends meet. The necklaces were the key. Their grandfather, a jeweler in Riverton, had crafted 2 identical sapphire necklaces for his daughters before he passed. When the girls were separated, each took one as a reminder of the other. But the pain of their estrangement was too much. Elizabeth buried her past, never mentioning Elena to James, maybe out of guilt for the life she'd been given while her sister struggled. And Elena? She never told Maria about Elizabeth, maybe to shield her from the pain of a family she'd never know. Maria was Elizabeth's niece. The maid James had barely noticed was his late wife's family. James felt like the ground had been pulled out from under him. Maria, the woman who'd been quietly cleaning his house for a year, was tied to Elizabeth in a way he never could have imagined. He invited her to sit down again, this time in the dining room, the table covered with photo albums and Tom's report. He didn't know how to start, so he just laid it all out: Elena, Elizabeth, the necklaces, the truth. Maria listened, her eyes wide, her hands clutching the edge of the table. When James showed her the photo of Elizabeth and Elena as teenagers, she started to cry. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Mom never told me she had a sister." Maria's mother died when she was 20, leaving her alone in the world. The necklace was all she had left of Elena, a piece of her heart she wore every day. She took the job at James's mansion because it was close to Riverton, a place that felt like home, even if she didn't know why. James felt a wave of emotions crash over him. Grief for Elizabeth, guilt for not knowing her full story, and something else, something softer. Relief, maybe. He looked at Maria, really looked at her, and saw Elizabeth in the way she tilted her head, the way her smile curved just so. It was like a piece of his wife was still here, in this woman he'd barely spoken to before. Maria was just as shaken. She'd grown up thinking it was just her and her mom against the world. To learn she had an aunt who'd lived in this very house, who'd loved the same necklace she did, was overwhelming. She touched the pendant around her neck, her fingers trembling. "I used to wonder why Mom was so attached to this," she said. "Now I know." Over the next few weeks, James and Maria started talking more, not as boss and employee, but as something closer to family. James opened up about Elizabeth, sharing stories Maria had never heard. How Elizabeth loved to sing off-key in the shower, how she'd sneak extra sugar into her coffee when she thought James wasn't looking, how she'd cry at every single rom-com they watched together. Maria soaked it all up, hungry to know the aunt she'd never met. They went through Elizabeth's things together, pulling out old letters, dresses, even a journal she'd kept in her 20s. Maria laughed through tears when she read about Elizabeth's failed attempt to bake a birthday cake for James, the kitchen covered in flour, the cake sinking like a deflated balloon. James found himself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in years. Maria started opening up too. She told James about her childhood in Riverton, growing up in a cramped apartment with Elena. Money was tight, but Elena always made it feel like an adventure, turning cardboard boxes into forts, making soup from whatever was in the pantry. Maria had dreams of going to college, maybe becoming a teacher, but life got in the way. After Elena died, she took whatever jobs she could find, ending up as a housekeeper to pay the bills. James listened, his heart heavy. Elizabeth would have wanted more for Maria, he knew that. So he did something he hadn't planned. He set up a scholarship fund in Elizabeth's name, with Maria as the first recipient. It wasn't just about the money, though it would cover tuition and books, it was about giving Maria a chance to chase her dreams, the way Elizabeth would have. "She'd be so proud of you," James told her, and Maria's eyes filled with tears again. They started spending more time together outside of the house too. One weekend, they drove to Riverton, visiting the old neighborhood where Elizabeth and Elena grew up. They found the street where their childhood home once stood, now replaced by a strip mall, but the memories lingered. Maria pointed out the park where she used to play as a kid, not knowing her aunt had once swung on those same swings. James felt a pang of bittersweet joy, like he was reconnecting with Elizabeth through Maria. This story isn't just about a necklace or a long-lost family member. It's about how grief can wrap you in a fog, making you miss the people right in front of you. James could have fired Maria, accused her of stealing, or ignored the necklace altogether. But he didn't. He followed his instincts, and it led him to a connection he never knew he needed. Maria, too, could have kept her distance, stayed the quiet maid in the background. But she opened up, and in doing so, found a piece of her own history. A 2023 study from the National Institute of Mental Health found that grief can isolate us, with 70% of bereaved individuals reporting feelings of loneliness even years after a loss. But forming new connections, whether with friends, community, or unexpected family, can be a lifeline. James and Maria are living proof. They didn't just find each other, they found a way to keep Elizabeth's and Elena's memories alive, together. The necklaces are a symbol of that. According to a 2021 report from the American Historical Association, family heirlooms are more than just objects, they're tangible links to the past, carrying stories that connect generations. For Maria, the necklace was her mother's love, a reminder of the woman who raised her. For James, it was Elizabeth's light, a piece of the life they'd built. Now, it's a bridge between them, a reminder that family can show up in the most unexpected places. But the story doesn't end there. There's more to uncover, more layers to peel back. Because life, like this necklace, is never as simple as it seems. Just when James thought he had all the answers, another piece of the puzzle surfaced. While going through Elizabeth's journal, he found a letter tucked between the pages, yellowed with age. It was addressed to Elena, written in Elizabeth's neat, looping handwriting, dated a year before she met James. The letter was never sent. In it, Elizabeth poured out her heart. She wrote about missing Elena, about the guilt she felt for the life she'd been given while her sister struggled. She mentioned the necklaces, how she wore hers every day, hoping it would somehow keep them connected. But there was something else, a reference to a promise they'd made as kids, a promise to find each other no matter what. Elizabeth wrote that she'd been searching for Elena, hiring investigators, tracking down leads, but every trail went cold. James read the letter again, his hands shaking. Elizabeth had been looking for her sister, even as she built a new life with him. Why hadn't she told him? Was she ashamed? Afraid? Or was it just too painful to share? He showed the letter to Maria, who read it with tears streaming down her face. "Mom never said anything," she whispered. She must have thought Elizabeth didn't want her. The letter raised more questions than it answered. Why had Elena never reached out? Had she been angry at Elizabeth for her privileged life? Or was there something else keeping them apart? James and Maria decided to dig deeper, determined to understand the full story of the sisters' estrangement. They started with Riverton's public records, combing through old foster care documents and newspaper archives. They found mentions of the accident that killed Elizabeth and Elena's parents, a drunk driver, a rainy night, a tragedy that left 2 girls orphaned at 12. The records showed Elizabeth's adoption by the Harpers, a wealthy couple who gave her a new last name and a ticket to a better life. But Elena's file was messy: foster homes, run-ins with social workers, a teenage rebellion that landed her in juvenile detention for a few months. Maria was stunned. Her mother had never talked about her past, always brushing off questions with a smile and a change of subject. But the records painted a picture of a girl who'd fought to survive, who'd carried the weight of loss and abandonment her whole life. The necklace, it seemed, was more than an heirloom, it was Elena's anchor, a reminder of the family she'd lost. As James and Maria pieced together the sisters' story, they grew closer. They started having dinner together most nights, not in the formal dining room but in the cozy kitchen, swapping stories over plates of spaghetti or takeout pizza. Maria told James about the time she and Elena stayed up all night sewing costumes for a school play, laughing until they cried. James shared how Elizabeth would sneak into his office with a tray of cookies, pretending she just happened to bake too many. They found comfort in the memories, in the way their stories wove together like threads in a tapestry. One evening, Maria brought out a box of her mother's things, old photos, a few letters, a worn-out address book. Among them was a sketch, drawn in pencil, of 2 girls holding hands, each wearing a necklace. "Mom drew this," Maria said, her voice soft. "I never knew what it meant until now." The sketch was dated 1985, when Elena would have been 15, probably right after she and Elizabeth were separated. It was a glimpse into Elena's heart, a wish to hold on to her sister even as the world pulled them apart. James felt a lump in his throat. He realized how much Elizabeth and Elena had loved each other, even if life had driven a wedge between them. He and Maria made a pact: they'd honor both women by keeping their memories alive. They started planning a memorial garden in the backyard, a place where they could plant flowers Elizabeth loved, roses, lilies, sunflowers, and a small plaque for Elena, too. It was a way to bring the sisters back together, even if only in spirit. But healing isn't a straight line. James struggled with guilt, wondering why Elizabeth had kept Elena a secret. Had she been afraid he'd judge her? Or was it too painful to talk about the sister she couldn't find? Maria, too, grappled with her own questions. Why hadn't her mother told her about Elizabeth? Was Elena angry, hurt, or just trying to protect her? The answers were locked in the past, and that was the hardest part, knowing they might never fully understand. A 2024 study from the American Psychological Association found that unresolved grief can linger for decades, especially when tied to family secrets. For James, the letter in Elizabeth's journal was a reminder of the life she'd left behind, a life he'd never fully known. For Maria, it was a window into her mother's pain, a pain she'd carried silently. But together, they were finding a way forward, not by erasing the past but by embracing it. They started reaching out to people who'd known Elizabeth and Elena. Old neighbors in Riverton, a foster parent who remembered Elena's fiery spirit, a teacher who'd taught both girls in elementary school. Each story added a piece to the puzzle, painting a picture of 2 sisters who'd loved each other fiercely but were torn apart by circumstances they couldn't control. The teacher, Mrs. Callahan, now in her 70s, told them about the day Elizabeth and Elena were separated. They clung to each other, sobbing, she said. They made a promise to find each other someday. I don't think they ever stopped hoping. One day, while cleaning out Elizabeth's study, James found another letter, this one sealed, addressed to my sister. It was dated just a month before Elizabeth's death. In it, she wrote about finding Elena. She'd hired another investigator, tracked down an address in Riverton, and was planning to reach out. I don't know if you'll forgive me, she wrote, but I never stopped loving you. I wear the necklace every day, hoping it's keeping you close. She mentioned Maria, too, saying she'd heard Elena had a daughter and wanted to meet her someday. James and Maria read the letter together, sitting on the floor of the study, surrounded by Elizabeth's books and papers. Maria was sobbing, her hands pressed to her face. James felt tears sting his eyes, too. Elizabeth had been so close to reuniting with her sister, but time ran out. The letter was a reminder of how fragile life is, how quickly it can slip through your fingers. But it was also a gift. It showed them that Elizabeth and Elena had never given up on each other, even if they didn't know it. The necklaces, the promise, the love, it had all survived, carried forward by Maria and James. They decided to honor that promise in their own way. James offered to help Maria move out of the maid's quarters and into a guest room, treating her not as an employee but as family. Maria enrolled in community college, using the scholarship fund to study education, just like she'd always dreamed. They also visited Elizabeth's grave together, bringing Elena's necklace and a photo of the sisters as kids. Maria laid flowers on the grave, lilies, Elizabeth's favorite, and whispered, "Thank you, Aunt Elizabeth. I wish I'd known you." James stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, feeling like Elizabeth was there with them, smiling. James and Maria are still figuring out their new normal. They're not just employer and employee anymore, they're family, bound by love, loss, and a pair of sapphire necklaces. James is turning Elizabeth's old study into a space for Maria to study, complete with a desk, a laptop, and a framed photo of Elizabeth and Elena. Maria's planning to visit Riverton again, this time to track down more people who knew her mother and aunt, hoping to piece together more of their story. Life has a way of surprising you. You think you're just hiring a maid, or cleaning a house, or wearing a necklace to remember someone you loved. And then, out of nowhere, a single moment, like a flash of sapphire, changes everything. James and Maria found more than a necklace, they found each other, and through each other, they found a way to heal. This story reminds us to look closer at the people in our lives, to ask questions, to follow the clues. Because sometimes, the smallest things, a necklace, a photo, a letter, can lead to the biggest truths. According to a 2025 report from the National Institute of Family Studies, 1 in 3 people discover a family secret that changes their perspective on their loved ones, often through objects like heirlooms. For James and Maria, the necklaces were that object, a thread that tied their past to their future. So, what's the lesson here? Don't be afraid to dig. Don't be afraid to ask. And don't be afraid to open your heart, even when it hurts. Because you never know what you might find, or who you might find, on the other side. Want to hear another story that'll make you rethink the secrets hiding in plain sight? Click the video on the screen right now.